Commissioner Young, sir. Good to see you.
Good to see you and your suit jacket.
It's a little nippy, ain't it?
All right, thank you. It is 6 o'clock. So welcome everyone to this City Planning Commission meeting on October 26, 2021. We are, instead of a Planning Commission meeting, since we have no cases tonight, we are having a training conducted by City Attorney Joe Lauber. So I'm going to let whoever needs to take over, and unless I need to swear us all to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
We do have a couple of items that need approved. We have the rules of procedure change first on the agenda.
Okay. So I guess first, if you'll call the roll to make sure we are present.
Okay, Commissioner Ferguson?
Here.
Commissioner Rochelle?
Here.
Commissioner Nesbitt?
Here.
Commissioner Wiley?
Here.
Commissioner Young?
Here.
Commissioner Preston?
Here.
And Chairwoman McLean.
Here. Thank you. Okay, so before we start our training, we will do look at the amendments to the rules of procedure. Who is going to go over this with us? Is that Mr. Lauber? Are you doing that, or someone from the city about the changes?
I wasn't aware that I was. I don't know if somebody from staff was prepared to do that.
I'm hoping our Assistant Director, Rick, is going to help us out here.
Okay. I'm happy to read them each if I need to, or you all have a copy of this and we've all looked over it. If there are any changes to it or further discussion.
For what it's worth, we did review everything and don't have any concerns with what's been proposed.
Okay. Commissioners, are you good with it? If so, I'll take a motion.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
as per the proposed changes to the rules of procedure, I move that those changes be adopted as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
All right. Miranda, would you like to do roll?
Sure. Commissioner Ferguson?
Yes.
Commissioner Rochelle?
Yes.
Commissioner Nesbitt?
Yes.
Commissioner Wiley?
Yes.
Commissioner Young?
Yes.
Commissioner Preston?
Yes.
And Chairwoman McLean.
Yes. The amendments to the rules and procedures has passed. Just for the viewers' knowledge, it was very few things. A couple of the things that we did enabled us to be able to change the agenda and make it so that if we had a lengthy one at the beginning, we could actually put it at the end. So people who are waiting for like short-term rentals or something like that, we could put you first so that you're not waiting. So that's really basically it. Okay, we are ready to be trained.
Okay, so Miranda, I guess I'll just make sure, let's see, it says here to share my screen, I need to ask the organizer to make me a presenter. Oh, now it says I am the presenter. Okay. Let's see here. So let me try this. All right, and so hopefully on the screen now you can see the title page. Does that look right to everyone? Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, very good. All right. Okay, we'll go ahead and dive in. First of all, thank you all for having us do this training session tonight. You know, we spend a lot of time developing training programs for cities throughout the state of Missouri, and I always think it's good to get a nice refresher of kind of, you know, like why we're here and what it is that we're trying to do in a greater context. And so tonight, we're going to go over, again, some of the basics of the Planning and Zoning Commissions, you know, where in the law it comes from and so forth. I know, I'm not sure exactly how our firm was introduced as the city attorney, and if we were even introduced as a city attorney, in what ways. Actually, Jeremy Cover, one of the partners in our firm, is the primary contact for Independence, and so he's, you know, essentially the city councilor from that standpoint. I know you've had a few folks covering the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, so I thought I'd at least start out giving you all a little bit about my background. I've actually been a municipal attorney for 18 years now. Just last month was that anniversary. A little over 10 years, almost 11 years ago, I founded Lauber Municipal Law. Literally started this firm in the out of the front room of my house. I had a laptop and 4 clients, and from there we've been very blessed. Have a great staff. We now have 8 full-time attorneys who practice nothing but municipal law and only for cities. We are the city attorney for 60 cities in the state of Missouri. We're also prosecutor for just a little over a dozen cities, and perform special counsel role for probably 24 cities throughout the state in various areas. On the call tonight, you may see Anthony Hernandez, Tony Hernandez, and Katie Gerstner. They are 2 new associates that have started with us. So I asked them to join tonight so that they could take advantage of this information. We actually did an in-house training for our new attorneys and our law clerk earlier just on Friday, and so they got a shorter version of this. So we're going to go through a more detailed version of the Planning and Zoning Commission training this evening. So again, we appreciate the opportunity to serve the City of Independence as city councilor, and you know, look forward to working with you for the years to come. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive into the presentation materials for this evening. What we're going to do is kind of go through some background information on planning and zoning, why, you know, when it came about, why we have it. We're going to talk about roles of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we're going to talk about procedural issues that we run into in carrying out the various responsibilities that are out there. As we go, feel free to interrupt, ask questions, you know, on a particular topic. Some of the items will be covered maybe in more detail later. I always try to build from, you know, kind of the big picture and then narrow it down. But, you know, we can certainly, you know, I can either, you know, say, hey, we're going to cover this in 2 slides, or we can, you know, cover that item at that point. So initially, the background information about planning and zoning starts with nuisance. So in the beginning, there was nuisance, and you see on the screen here, you got these, you know, kind of probably, you know, 1900s pugilists here, and the idea, you know, prior to zoning was all you had to protect yourself with respect to the use of your property was the ability to sue somebody for a nuisance. And so the concept of nuisance is that one person is free to enjoy the use of their property up until the point that that use of property infringes on the right of someone else to use their property. You know, so there's a adage that you're always free to swing your arms right up until the point that you hit somebody in the nose. And, you know, kind of the idea behind the photo there. And so the problem with using nuisance as the basis for land use is it's completely reactionary. You have to wait until someone, you know, actually moves in next to you and starts a use of their own property that ruins the enjoyment of your property before you could do anything about it. And so you can imagine, you know, people, especially, you know, when folks are buying, you know, their home, you know, it's usually the largest investment any person ever makes in their life. You have, everybody talks about their dream home, and you have these, maybe these ideas of this, idyllic, suburb home with a white picket fence and rose bushes and so forth. And that's a great dream right up until the point that someone, buys the property next to you and puts in a chicken rendering plant. And so that obviously can be, something that's very problematic, and why people get very emotional about land use issues. So as we moved from a more agrarian culture, essentially, and folks working on the farm and kind of working to provide for their own families, and we began to see the effects of the Industrial Revolution, and started mass production and things like that, the problems of that Industrial Revolution began to compound. If you see the picture here, you see these houses, but the giant smokestacks, right next to them, and the girders and of heavy industrial, kind of right next door. And you start to realize that reactionary approach isn't necessarily the best one, because one person's investment into a piece of property for one concept, whether that's in anything from residential all the way up to industrial, those folks are going to have interests that are completely at odds. And so after the Industrial Revolution got going in the middle part of the 1800s, these issues started to pop up, and it became kind of a question for government, really, to handle what essentially the market wasn't able to handle at that point, was dealing with how do you take this from being reactionary and being more preventative as you go with respect to that. So what we started to see happen was and it started initially with the federal government. They created enabling acts, and enabling acts in general are usually passed at a state level, and they provide a basic framework for powers, that are designed to address a more global problem. So we move forward to 1916, and New York City ends up passing the very first Planning Enabling Act at that time. By 1928, the federal government actually created 2 model acts designed to address land use, and both of those ended up being adopted by every state in the union at that time, within 1 year of their creation. And so those 2 model acts are known as the Standard City Planning Enabling Act, or the SPEA, and the Standard Zoning Enabling Act, SZEA. And as I mentioned, once those were adopted, they were adopted by each and every state individually. Ours happens to be found at Chapter 89 of the Missouri Revised Statutes. So while we're talking about general terms, and again, we're gonna drill down into each of these topics as we go, but just as a big picture kind of conceptual approach, we have both planning and zoning are concepts that come into play when we talk about land use. And so when we talk about planning, what we're talking about is a city's general policy to guide the development of the land. So again, it's that prospective, not reactive kind of approach to how land is going to be used. So a city's plan for development over time is often called the comprehensive plan. Independence has a comprehensive plan. A comprehensive plan can be just that, comprehensive. It can be made up of many, many components. A comprehensive plan might entail a traffic plan, or how we're going to do a road plan and so forth. It should plan for infrastructure. It might include economic development incentives, future annexations. Certainly land use is something that we're used to using, and land use both in the idea of zoning, which we'll talk about in a few moments, and from subdivision. How can someone take a larger piece of land and divide it into smaller pieces from an investment standpoint, and what is in the best interest of the city when that comes forward? So this planning addresses the big picture of how the city would like to develop over time. And again, we have to keep in mind that as we do planning, there are decisions that will be made today, whether it's by this planning commission, you know, from a recommending body standpoint, from the city council standpoint. But these are things that every decision that we make will form a foundation for the future for the city of Independence and how things will play out. And so, you know, we all have this opportunity at this point in time. We hold the baton, but you know, that baton was passed to us, each of us individually, and we have the care of making policy decisions and recommending policy decisions far into the future for the city of Independence. And at some point, we're going to pass that baton on to successor commissions and successor councils. One of the most important concepts about planning has to do with kind of the reduction of what we call leapfrog zoning. And what I mean when we say that is, as you look at a city, especially a city that is not landlocked, a city that has the ability to expand or has not fully developed to all of its jurisdictional boundaries, you have issues if you develop further out areas before you develop those that are closer in. Then you have issues with provision of services. So if let's say you have a city, you have an area of the city in particular that has not fully developed, and a developer owns a piece of property that's a half mile, 3/4 of a mile out from the nearest development, and they decide to develop that first. Well, you can think just immediately there may be infrastructure concerns. How do we service that property with water? How do we serve it with sewer? Every time that we allow that kind of a development to occur, that much further removed from where the developed areas of the city are, it costs more money to send police officers, fire department, ambulance, all of the city services, whether we're plowing streets and so forth. And so one of the major concepts about planning is to make sure that property owners, although they may own property that they want to develop, that's not necessarily what is in the best interest of the city as a whole. And so we're not really concerned about profit and whether their timing is right. What needs to make sense is whether the timing is right for the city as a whole. And that's where that planning kind of comes in and says, hey, we're going to have to stop or slow down the development that an applicant may be bringing in, because it's premature at this point, and it will end up costing the citizens more money because it's going to cost the city more money to provide those services. So we'll keep that in mind. One of the things to be aware of when it comes to planning is plans in Missouri are not law. Okay, they're not adopted by ordinance. They are a policy, and they're much more flexible. When I was in law school and took land use, I had the benefit of having land use by my professor was Dr. Freilich, who was a renowned zoning expert from New York who had moved to UMKC and actually started for a while, UMKC for decades actually. UMKC was one of the best municipal law schools in the entire country. And we actually had a publication for the American Bar Association called The Urban Lawyer that was actually published here in Kansas City, in the Kansas City area at UMKC School of Law. And Dr. Freilich, brought that there. I remember, being in his class and how frustrated he was because there's a case in Missouri where, Dr. Freilich he thought that plans should be a lot more strictly enforced. But there is a case in Missouri that essentially says, plans, they're really, truly just a guide, and it was possible for cities to create plans out of something that really wasn't much of a plan. So he was extremely frustrated by that. I think that law is actually good for cities, or that interpretation of the law by the courts is good for cities because it gives us flexibility. But Dr. Freilich wasn't incorrect, because the more the less stringent we are with plan and enforcement, then it does create concerns about whether we're making good policy to begin with. So couple things there. It is possible to have more than one plan in place in a city. I would say, and while that is true, what I would say is it goes back to that idea of the comprehensive plan, where you might have a traffic study or some sort of a transportation plan that is on a different cycle than the land use plan, or your annexation plan might be on a different cycle yet, or an economic development plan, depending on what components you decide to put together. So again, planning is an absolute best practice because that helps us stay in conformance with the overall Zoning Enabling Act, which we'll get into more detail here in just a few minutes. The other piece that we talked about beyond planning is zoning. And so zoning is the means to address the practical aspects of land use at a lot specific level in real time. So essentially what zoning is a tool to implement a comprehensive plan. Once we have set an idea of the direction that the city wants to go in and how we would like to see the development occur, then zoning is the tool to get there. Something to keep in mind, that zoning regulations affect the use of land both by scope, okay, which is height and bulk, and utility. So how the land is actually used. So, going back to scope, you may be familiar with various setback regulations that the city has in place. Like you cannot have, the sides of your house be too close to your property line or your neighbors. You can only set a deck so far from the neighbor. You can have the front of your house only be, so close to the front of the street, things like that. So that is a height and about, you can't build a 6-story house. You can only do, maybe at maximum a 2 or a 3-story house, depending on what you have for your height and bulk type regulations. The use, the utility, the use of your property, obviously, is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it mixed use? Can you have chickens? Can you have bees? Those types of things. Can you operate a home business? Those are all things that are taken care of through zoning as well on the use side of zoning. So zoning, as we kind of, again, think about like why we're here and what we're doing, it represents a proactive rather than a reactive approach to protecting property interests. With zoning laws in place, a property owner can be more confident that they will not be on their own to fight a bad use next door, because when they make their investment, they can do the research, they can identify, hey, how does the city want this property to develop? Is this property zoned in the same way that the city intends it to be, 20 and 30 years from now, what the comprehensive plan says? And if I decide to invest in my little house with its white picket fence and its little rose bushes, that I didn't just buy a house in the middle of an industrial zone that everybody else around me wants to put in the chicken rendering plant, okay? So once we have the laws in place, then we're going to have our government code enforcement officers then who will go out and actually do the administration, the enforcement of these laws. So in 1926, the United States Supreme Court heard a case that originated from the enforcement of the city of Euclid, Ohio's zoning ordinance. So Euclid is a suburb of Cleveland, and again, so if you remember these, back, just a slide or two ago, these Standard Zoning Enabling Act and Standard Planning Enabling Act came about actually in 1928. So this predated that. So this was a kind of an earlier adaptation of zoning. And remember, New York started theirs in 1916. So cities were already doing, this before the Uniform Acts kind of came together. But the state of Ohio had the ability to do that. The city of Euclid had adopted zoning. And what ended up happening is there's this company by the name of Ambler Realty, and they owned a huge amount of property in the city of Euclid. The city adopted zoning that limited the ability for them to sell property to potential buyers who wanted to use that property for industrial plants. So Ambler Realty sued the city saying, hey, you can't tell me that I can't sell this property to someone who wants to develop this property for industrial. That was, the investment that they had, recognized, and that's what they wanted to do on this property. And what Ambler said is that because you've put these regulations in place, you've reduced the value that we could have gotten for this property, the investment return on it, and therefore you've committed a takings in violation of the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution. And so that was the first constitutional challenge to the power of zoning. And in 1926, the United Supreme Court held that in general, zoning is absolutely a valid exercise of local government authority designed to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public in general, which is commonly known as the police powers. So to this day, you know, we're at a point now where zoning has been in effect for 100 years in the United States. Now, it didn't really exist prior to that, but zoning has been in effect for 100 years in the United States. I regularly, you know, I could at least tell you probably half a dozen times every year, I will hear a citizen in a planning and zoning commission meeting at some point say, "You can't tell me what I can and can't do with my property." I'm like, yeah, as a matter of fact, we can. Let me pull out Village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty, and the United States Supreme Court says cities absolutely can tell people what they can and can't do with their property. And that is a valid use of city power. Okay, so just as a bit of a recap, so where again, what is the summary of the sources for planning and zoning authority? Well, first of all, planning and zoning authority is a police power. Okay, that's what the U.S. Supreme Court case said, is zoning is valid because it benefits the public health, safety, and welfare. So where in Missouri do we find the authority to do planning and zoning? Well, that's Chapter 89. That's our state zoning enabling act, or it's really our planning and zoning enabling act. And then finally, and let me visit on this for just a second. So I keep saying the phrase enabling act. And what that means is the General Assembly for Missouri has put the ability to do planning and put the ability to do zoning into statutes. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't automatically create planning or zoning in cities. Okay, a city has to decide for themselves whether they want to utilize this power, and that's why it's called an enabling act. Is it gives you the option to do it, but in order to actually have zoning, you have to avail yourself of that power. You have to adopt it yourself. And so where do we do that? We do that in our planning and our zoning ordinances. Sometimes these are standalone provisions. Usually these are a component of the city's code of ordinances. I checked, Independence's website, and you guys kind of treat it as both. It is Chapter 14 of your code of ordinances. But if you go out to your website and look, you can actually click on a separate link that is your UDO, or what's called a Unified Development Ordinance, and it will just focus you on Chapter 14 at that point. And when we say Unified Development Ordinance, what that is usually about is the idea that you have both planning and zoning, and each of those has procedural aspects that come into play. And so a UDO is designed to lay out both the planning and the zoning together, and it usually has a collective procedural process that both kind of components of land use regulations follows. Your Chapter 14 is actually a pretty robust set of regulations. You have 5 separate articles and numerous ordinances that apply to how people can use their land in the city of Independence. All right, so moving now from kind of that real conceptual and background stuff, we're going to get into a little bit more detail with respect to what does Missouri's Planning and Zoning Enabling Act say. So we're going to visit Chapter 89 in a little more detail at this point. And kind of, again, this sets a context for, kind of why do we exist? Why are we here? What are we trying to do? And this is where all of this comes from with respect to state authority. So as I mentioned before, Chapter 89 establishes the authority of cities to plan and zone and provides the methods as to how the cities can carry out that authority. So we have to follow the rules that are laid out in Chapter 89. What I have done for you here is I've laid out the individual sections and kind of where this is. So the 89.310 is the actual statute number. If you have, horrible insomnia, you can always crack open a statute book and start reading this stuff for yourself. And this is where to find it. But you'll see that the planning provisions of the state enabling act, the planning enabling act, start at 89.310, which is it's the grant for all cities to have the authority to make a comprehensive plan for the development of the city. So if you avail yourself of that power in 89.310, then you look to 89.340, and it gives us general direction as to set, the contents of a plan. So you have to make recommendations for the physical development and uses of land. You have to lay out the general location, character, and extent of the public utilities and the public streets, other public places like parks, things like that. And you have to have a plan for the regulation of the height, the area, the bulk, the location, and use of structures and of population density. So those are the requirements. But again, keep in mind, it's an enabling act. So if you're ever at the giant, planning commission convention, I'm sure that they have one every year. You have your annual meeting where you all get together and have some margaritas and talk about all things planning. If you're sitting there talking to someone from another city, their regulations won't necessarily be the same. And that's because each city has the ability, as long as they follow the basics in this statute that we're going over right now, then they're free to do that differently for each city. And that only makes sense, correct? I mean, you think about a city with the size and the population and the diversity of use that occurs in the city of Independence, and compare that to like a Uric, Missouri, or a Creighton, Missouri, that's out in a rural area and is like, maybe 500 people, it wouldn't make sense to have all of Independence's rules apply in a city of Uric, and a city of Uric probably wouldn't be able to have the detail that you all have in your zoning regulations. And while I'm mentioning Uric has actually been a city that I've been the city attorney of since about 2011 or 12, I think it was. When I first became the city attorney for Uric, they had not yet adopted zoning. And so I actually helped them adopt their very first zoning code. And so we did a unified development ordinance in their city as well, so that they could begin to plan for planning and zoning. So that was, again, 2012, the authority had been around since the 1920s, and they had not taken advantage of it, in that, 80 or 90 year, 80 year time frame. So just, by way of example, you can still find communities today that don't have zoning in them. Okay. 89.360 does lay out the requirements for approval and amendment to a plan. So these are things that you all may be very familiar with. So we have to hold a public hearing. You're familiar with that. It does require a 15-day published notice. And in order to approve or amend a plan, it must be a majority vote of the full commission. So we have to have at least 4 yes votes in order to approve a plan. And that matters sometimes, because if we have a situation where we don't have all the members present, but we do have a quorum that allows us to operate, that may change whether that vote has to be unanimous or not on a particular evening. So with us being there, that's one of the things, that the city attorney looks at. As we, start up a meeting, we want to make sure that, we've got the full commission in place, because that will matter on how votes can go that evening. Something that, if you have a 7-member board, it takes 4 to operate because of quorum rules. Approval would require a completely unanimous vote that night. A 3-1, while it would appear on its face to be an approval, would actually fail. So 89.360 does say that your approvals must be by resolution, and there's also a requirement that the plan and resolution must be recorded and made available in the county recorder's office. So typically that's the responsibility of staff, that once your resolutions and again, this is a plan, not any sort of like a zoning amendment, but a plan amendment does have to be recorded with the Jackson County recorder's office. Okay, continuing now, let me make sure I didn't skip something here. Okay, continuing now into the zoning provisions, 89.020 grants all cities the power to zone. So weirdly, I kind of always cover this. My idea is that it's the plan first. So we create, the plan going forward for the community, and then we create zoning to implement that. So I always cover them in that order. But you might notice that if you went back and looked up a slide prior, we were talking about 89.300, which comes later in the statutes. And I don't personally know what the reason is, because either something was either radically changed with respect to planning in 1963, or planning maybe had not been yet adopted by the state of Missouri, where zoning had been. But for whatever reason, our planning statutes are actually later in the chapter than our zoning, even though, again, I think, both were created at the same time by the federal government. So I don't have an explanation for that, but the zoning comes first in the statute books. 89020 gives that authority. 89040 talks about the purpose of zoning. So we have to create regulations that conform to that comprehensive plan. We provide for the safety, adequate light, air, avoid concentration of population and overcrowding, and we preserve features of historical significance. This is all language that comes straight from the statute. And then we're also charged with creating regulations that keep with the character of the district, the suitability of the uses, the conservation of property values, and the appropriate use of land. Okay, and so what is the appropriate use of land? Well, that's what we're deciding, both through the comprehensive plan and through the ordinances that implement it. So how does the Planning and Zoning Commission, how does it come about? Well, that is found at, and I apologize. I don't think we got the city code sections updated in this one, so that should be chapter 14. So I apologize. This right-hand column is actually incorrect, but let's focus on the left-hand column with respect to the statutes. 89.070 requires the city to appoint a zoning commission if it wishes to exercise the zoning powers. 89.320 then sets forth the membership of a planning commission, and essentially 89.330 talks about the commission, the officers, and the rules and regulations. So in 89.070, where it talks about zoning, that section actually, in the language of the statute, specifically states that if a city has a planning commission in place, it may be appointed as the zoning commission. I'll jump over to this column where we should have put here is, and interestingly, the Independence Code doesn't really lay out anything to do with the planning commission in the code itself, because the city of Independence is what's known as a home rule charter city. So I'll take a moment to talk about that. The reason why, if you ever get beyond the fact that zoning and planning comes from an enabling act, which allows each kind of city to do its own thing, if you will, within the parameters of that enabling act. The other point that needs to be made is not all cities in Missouri are of the same type. There are actually multiple types of cities in Missouri, and that can cause differences in how zoning, either maybe the composition of the zoning, planning and zoning commission, how it works and so forth. So the city of Independence is a home rule charter city. And so what that means is there is authority in the Missouri Constitution that allows cities to borrow straight from the Constitution and create a government for itself. Okay. And when you adopt that charter, and when you become a charter city, then you essentially, that charter kind of almost becomes your little mini constitution. And what the law says about home rule charter cities is they have all of the power that the General Assembly has given them or could give them. So it's a very broad authority. You just can't contravene either the Constitution or laws that are already in place, okay? The difference, though, is, if you're familiar with, other cities in Jackson County, so Kansas City is also a home rule charter city, so it pulls its power, just like Independence does, straight from the Missouri Constitution. Lee Summit, same. Blue Springs, same. Crane Valley, on the other hand, Oak Grove, Buckner, Sibley, some of these other cities in Jackson County are what are called fourth class cities. They're called statutory cities. And another name for those is what's called a Dillon's Rule city. And the idea behind that is there was Judge Dillon was a Supreme Court justice up in Iowa back in I think it was late 1800s, early 1900s. And when there was a court case that challenged, the authority of cities to just regulate and what their powers are. And so Judge Dillon, created what is now known as Dillon's Rule. And it says that cities have only those powers that have been granted to them in the express words of a statute, or those that are necessarily or fairly implied in those express grants. And so, those concepts all come home, even when we're dealing with a home rule city, because we have to think about whether a statute or the Constitution itself limits the city in any way. So, again, so the stuff that should be on the right-hand column of your slide would actually say that your provisions for the Planning Commission are actually found in your city charter. And again, so one of tonight's changes, if you looked at it, is you actually changed your name tonight from the Planning and Zoning Commission to the Planning Commission. And one of the things that we looked at, because that red flagged for me, as soon as I saw that in your proposed resolution for tonight, I thought, whoa, is that right? Because I know the state law says Planning Commission, Zoning Commission, and you can combine. So we went back and looked at it, and sure enough, in your charter, it's only a Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has the authority to carry out Zoning Commission powers, but it's known as the Planning Commission. So your resolution tonight, deadly on point, and it actually correctly renamed your commission to what the charter provides. All right, so talking more again about Planning and Zoning Commission composition, the state statute requires the Planning Commission to be comprised of 7 to 15 members, and that can include the mayor if the mayor so chooses, or a city council member if the council so chooses. And then depending on whether or not, so if in that case the mayor and the city council do sit on, a member of the city council sit on the Planning Commission, then the remainder of the members have to be 5 to 15 citizens to carry that out. We recommend that most cities keep it to the statutory minimum, just because it's hard enough to find volunteers that are willing to serve on many of these boards, and there are other boards to fill out as well. So state statute requires 4-year staggered terms, and so the city's provisions, I believe, match up with that. And I apologize, I can't get to I have screens that are behind this, but I can't see them now that I'm sharing, and I have the provisions up. So I was going to flip over to your charter real quick to look, but we'll move on from that. So let's talk now about the P&Z Commission powers found in Chapter 89. So one of the initial powers that's important to the Planning Commission is that the Planning Commission is the authority to prepare a comprehensive plan, and that's found at 89-350. And the Planning Commission adopts that plan by resolution. I believe that we talked about with respect to that previously. But in preparing that comprehensive plan, it's important to note that the Planning Commission is the final authority with respect to adopting a comprehensive plan. That is many cities, and I haven't been with the City of Independence long enough to know whether this is true or not. Many cities will still have their governing body, whether it's a city council or a board of aldermen, approve a comprehensive plan after the Planning Commission does. What I will tell you is that is largely ceremonial and unnecessary. But it makes everybody feel good, so we usually just let them do it. But the actual authority to adopt a comprehensive plan at 89-360 resides with the Planning Commission. Now, that's okay, because normally, we got to think about, even at the city level, at the local level, we still have all 3 branches of government, right? We have the legislature, we have the administrative or the executive department, and we have the judicial department. And, you know, the legislators are, you know, elected officials whose job it is to carry out the best interests of the citizens by adopting the laws. Okay. And remember what we talked about with the comprehensive plan is it's actually not the effective law. It does not have the effective law. It's really more of a guide. However, the law, when it is adopted, is supposed to follow that comprehensive plan. But, you know, that's my story about my professor being upset with Missouri because, you know, Missouri has actually softened the effect of the plan when it comes to that. But again, you know, say it again, the adoption of the actual comprehensive plan is the purview of the Planning Commission. When it comes to zoning regulations and setting zoning boundaries, those are done by ordinance. And in that circumstance, the Planning Commission moves from a deciding body like it was with the comprehensive plan, and now it's a recommending body when it comes to the zoning regulations with respect to that. So we essentially perform a administrative role really in both cases, because in the first case of the comprehensive plan, we're kind of creating, you know, really policy or guides, not law. And in the second, in the zoning area, we're making recommendations to the governing body as to what legislation to pass. So in both cases, we're not fully legislative. You know, we might be considered quasi-legislative. I'm not sure if that's even a thing, but that's kind of more the role of the Planning Commission as we carry out the our purpose in this group. Okay, so let's talk about subdivision regulations. So, you know, a component of the planning piece of our responsibility is subdivision regulations. And what that is really talking about, we mentioned before, is how do you take a large piece of property and break it up into smaller pieces of property for investment, sales purposes, and, you know, development purposes. And that is covered at 89.410. And again, when you adopt subdivision regulations, they are ordinances. They have the effect of law. And so again, the Planning Commission is a recommending body in this circumstance. You know, and again, primarily the thing to think about here is you all are not elected. You've been appointed by the mayor and the council to carry out your roles, but you don't owe a duty to the constituents the same way that the council does. And that really kind of creates a dividing line for our role when it comes to how all this stuff is carried out. So recommendations on the subdivision regulations, I got a bunch of bullet points there. I'm not going to go over with respect to that, but it kind of gives you an idea of the flavor of what we're looking for when you have subdivision regulations that you're going to recommend, or maybe an applicant comes in and wants to do a subdivision, you know, and they're asking you to make that recommendation on their behalf. What are the things we're looking at to make sure that, you know, this is both meeting with the comprehensive plan and, you know, generally, you know, what is in the best interest of the city going forward with that respect. Plat approval is covered at 89.410, and there's actually a whole separate chapter in Missouri laws, at chapter 445, that deal with all of the rules for plat approval. And again, these are things that, like, our office and also city staff, you know, that's the stuff that we're working on behind the scenes as we prepare an agenda and a like a meeting informational packet for you. These are all the things that we're kind of charged with kind of putting together for you guys, so that you have the best information possible to make the decisions that you need to with respect to, you know, the applications that are coming forward. I want to talk for just a moment about the approval of infrastructure improvements. That's 89.380 of the Missouri Revised Statutes. And this is one, I'll be honest with you, I think a lot of cities maybe miss. And so again, I'm new enough with Independence. I'm not sure where you guys are with this, but what the state statute says is that once a comprehensive plan has been approved, or even a transportation plan is approved, infrastructure plan, you know, whatever, no street or other public facilities may be constructed until it has been first approved by the commission. Like I said, a lot of cities miss this. So, you know, that's maybe something we'll go back and visit with Rick and Tom about, just to make sure, you know, that we're providing for that stuff. But just an FYI, that is actually in the statutes as a requirement or a responsibility of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission also makes recommendations relating to the plan and development of the city. Of course, that, that's kind of what we've been talking about as we've gone along. And then we make recommendations on plats if a major street plan is in place. So there's a couple kind of technical things. And I will tell you again, I think a lot of cities miss that stuff. And so it's just something to kind of come back and look at. I guess the good news is not a lot of people really have a deep and full understanding of all this stuff. So what it does is it reduces the potential that the city's going to get sued because, A, who knows about it, and B, who really wants to spend their money chasing the city on something like that, because it usually doesn't really truly damage them. Where it can come up is in, a case where someone's trying to fight, some sort of development that's gone on to say, well, the city didn't have authority to do that. So again, that's stuff that we'll visit with city staff about as we go along. Okay, plan approval. Let's talk about that for a moment. Comprehensive plan approval and amendment is covered at 89-360. We talked about this a little bit earlier, kind of a repeat, but it lays out the public hearing, the notice requirements, the full majority. So again, these are issues that we kind of covered in an earlier slide, just kind of hitting that one again as we go. Zoning regulations have to be in accordance with a comprehensive plan. The commission makes that preliminary report. You must hold a public hearing, and then your commission decision is actually put into a final report and sent over to the planning or to the city council when they get ready to do an approval. So let's talk for a moment about constitutional limitations that may apply with respect to land use regulations, whether we're talking about planning, subdivision, or zoning. So if an ordinance goes too far, and you see I have that in quotation marks, because like, what does that really mean? But if you kind of put it another way, if you kind of over-regulate a piece of property, a property owner may have a case to say, you rendered my property without value. You basically took all the value away. And what that would be, if that's the case, then that would be deemed a taking, a regulatory taking under in violation of the Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. So remember when we talked about Ambler Realty versus Village of Euclid earlier, that's exactly what that case was about. The property owners wanted to sell and develop the property as industrial. And Euclid had said, nope, this is all for houses. We're not going to allow you to put that chicken rendering plant here, that steel mill or whatever they were trying to put there. And those folks said, well, because you did that, you rendered it without value. And what I will say is essentially the Supreme Court said, no, you didn't. It's not completely without value. You could still develop it as a residential subdivision. That's no problem. Euclid left you open to do that. So you're not without value. Just because you can't use the property for the way that you had hoped to use it is not a taking. So another thing that we will look at with respect to zoning is whether or not a regulation could potentially go so far as to render a property invaluable or without value. So what the Enabling Act provides for, and you guys are probably familiar with this kind of sister commission essentially for the city or entity at the city, and what the Enabling Act says is that in addition to having a planning and or zoning or planning commission that operates as a zoning commission as you guys have, that's a requirement of having zoning. Like you guys have to exist because Independence has zoning. Likewise, Independence must have a board of adjustment. Sometimes they're called zoning board of adjustment. Sometimes they're called board of zoning adjustment, board of adjustment, whatever it is, all means the same thing. And what it is that is what is known as a quasi-judicial body that is charged with taking a look at when a regulation that is designed to apply to all properties, maybe it's throughout the city, or maybe it's just within a particular zoning type or zoning district, is, does the application of the regulation to an individual property create a situation where we have rendered that property value less? And so, and therefore a taking would occur. And so that Board of Adjustment exists to take a look at, is there something with this property that makes it special or different than everything else around it, that the application of that wide-ranging regulation on that piece of property creates a problem. And that's what the Board of Adjustment is designed to do, is to create what's called, or what's kind of commonly known as a safety valve, to allow for an adjustment to the regulations that you all have recommended and the City Council has approved. They have the ability to kind of undo that with respect to certain regulations as applied to certain properties. What I will tell you is, historically and unfortunately, many boards of adjustment need training like this as well on their roles, and they don't fully understand it. And so they tend to kind of, anything that comes through gets approved, which it can be upsetting to both the planning commission and the governing body, in your case a city council, because you all have set the law, and if they keep bending the law, which they're authorized to do, then ultimately it ends up being somewhat of a, it certainly diminishes the power that the council has. And I will tell you that, interestingly, maybe at least to me, because I'm a dork about municipal law, is that probably there is an equal number of lawsuits against boards of adjustment by the city for decisions that they've made as there are for people who didn't get the variance or the thing that they wanted. So, for that very reason is the council said, no, this is the law, stop allowing this to go forward. And so there are actually many, many cases where, the city will actually sue its own board of adjustment for decisions that was made. And I say sue, it's not like this, angry lawsuit where we're trying to get damage or anything like that. What is really happening is, once the board of adjustment makes a decision, it is not to be going to the council then for a final decision. That's not how the law works. Those decisions are actually appealed to the circuit court, who will then make a decision on that when we're following the proper procedure. So that's actually a whole different training session that I've actually done for the City of Independence back in the day, a long time ago. But maybe something that we'll be doing again soon. But wanted to share that with you just because it's kind of an interesting correlated area of what we do. So, okay. So let's talk for a moment about discretion in zoning decisions. Okay. And so zoning decisions, the discretion in those kind of fall into these three categories. And we've mentioned it before with respect to the kind of the separation of powers, or the division of the three branches of government as they apply at the local level. So legislative, city absolutely has a legislative branch, and as you might guess, it's the city council, because they make the laws. Okay, and so when the city council makes decisions about setting the law, that's a legislative decision. And, again, defined by the police power. So that is laid out either in your home rule charter, first the Missouri Constitution, your home rule charter, potentially laws that the General Assembly have established, and also the laws that have been established for your city with respect to, again, you don't have to have zoning because you've adopted zoning, then you can make the city council can ultimately make legislative decisions about zoning. So these are done by elected officials who are responsible to their constituents and subject to, removal, either by impeachment or, ultimately by the voters at the polling place. But that's where they come to answer for the decisions that they've made. Legislative discretion is extremely broad. Okay, courts are very reticent to step in and say, no, sorry, elected officials, all these voters put you in place, but we know better than you that what needs to happen in your community. So they are very, very, very reluctant to jump in and say the city council got it wrong when it comes to a legislative decision. What it really boils down to is language you may have heard before, which is a legislative decision cannot be arbitrary or capricious. Essentially, it's a kind of a reasonableness standard, but in essence, you have to have made a decision that has zero basis in any sort of fact in order to get to have made the decision. And so what I will tell you, that city staff and the law department, our responsibility a lot of times, and if you see in these zoning ordinances, you might see a list of recitals and it says whereas this and whereas that. When we're making when we're drafting an ordinance, to bring a particular, zoning requirement through, we're going to load that language in the recitals with, whereas the city council finds that it's in a great importance to the city that we protect X, and that, the city council, studied, this, whether we had a study done or we borrowed a study from someone else, and here's the bad effects of these types of businesses or whatever, and therefore we're going to change the law to say that we're not going to allow this use or that use in a particular area. And so the reason that we load those recitals in is when if that is challenged as being whether that was a proper use of the city council's authority, the court's going to look at that and say, well, council, what did you look at when you made this decision? Like, did you base this in some sort of fact? And we put that language in there on purpose because it gives much better defense to the council if they ever get their laws challenged. And so, so just, probably more detail than you need, but this is, why some of this stuff exists. Administrative decisions. We talked about that a little bit earlier. So administrative decisions, they're going to be defined by law. And in most cases, they're going to be defined by the zoning ordinance that the legislature put in place. And so again, those administrative or those executive, branch of the government, in our circumstance, that's going to be city staff, and even more importantly, the code enforcement officers that are charged with going out and verifying whether someone is in violation of our zoning ordinance or not. Are they following proper subdivision standards? We had a case, fairly recently where someone went off and did, certain, improvements to their property without seeking the proper, going through the proper procedure. And, is that being carried out correctly? And so that's their rule. And so the administrative decision making is actually a much more limited standard, and essentially, from that particular that ability to make, to have discretion is limited to the parameters that have been set forth in the ordinance. So it's really, they're going to, administrative officers, the code enforcement officers, and so forth, they're essentially going to use that statute as a checklist and say, did you meet these things or did you not? And if you met it, then we're going to have to pass it through. And if you didn't meet it, then we're going to have to say no with respect to that. And then the next type of decision that we're going to talk about is that quasi-judicial decision making. We talked about that a little bit, I think it was just a slide ago with the Board of Adjustments. And so that is a situation where you don't have a fully judicial, like our municipal court is the judicial branch of our local government. But it's still a body that's going to take a look at the effect of a generally applicable law on a particular set of facts. And so, and when they're doing that, that's considered quasi-judicial because they're not fully, they don't have the full authority of the court of, the municipal court, for example, but they are going to do that analysis. And so quasi-judicial standards are again, very limited again, because, and when I do this training for the Board of Adjustments, I essentially say, you do not have authority, Board of Adjustments, to grant a variance unless you can show that these elements of a variance have been approved. And the case law in Missouri is thick with language that says variances are to be sparingly given, only in the most extreme cases. And I know the last time I did training for your Board of Adjustments, so I didn't look at it again before tonight, because that's not the topic for tonight, but I will tell you that, the variances that the City of Independence at least authorized when I did this, probably, 8 or 10 years ago, you did not even allow use variances to be granted at all, only area variances. And they have two different standards. And so it was kind of interesting because, most, Board of Adjustments actually have the ability to do both, but you guys did not. You guys, I say, collectively the city did not give that authority to the Board of Adjustment. So I know Jeremy and I have talked, I think, you know, and maybe he talked with Rick or Tom, and I think we're going to be doing some sort of training for them as well. All right, so review of legislative decision by courts, fairly debatable standard, so the court won't substitute its opinion. And the city's determination will only be reversed if it's arbitrary and unreasonable. And zoning is arbitrary and unreasonable if it bears no substantial relationship to public health, safety, morals, or general welfare. So again, that's what we try to do with those recitals that we talked about. Okay, so I'm going to try to wrap things up here. So we did go through and take a look at the city's ordinance. So this is City Code Chapter 14, as I mentioned before, and this lays out all of the review criteria for development applications. So when you see an application come forward, this is the thing that city staff is going to measure against to provide you with the information to say, you know, as this comes in, here's what the requirements are, and your role as the planning commission with respect to this is to kind of be, I'll say it this way, experts on behalf of the council. You know, the council's responsibility is to be worried about the budget and you know, what's going on in the police department, what's happening at the fire department, you know, this widespread, you know, list of things, but this zoning stuff's really important. And so we have kind of this panel of experts, which is this planning commission, that is responsible to kind of do the deep dive that is necessary on these applications to provide the information that the council needs to make a good legislative decision. And so, you know, that's really that role. Is staff is here to provide you all with the information to make a great recommendation and get you what you need, so that when your information, your recommendation comes over in the form of that report to the city council, then they should be taking a look at what you've done on their behalf and making decisions based on those recommendations. They don't have to by law, but you know, that's the general design. Couple things I want to cover with respect to just kind of some housekeeping items. A couple things to think about with respect to public hearings. So one issue I'd like to talk about is ex parte communication. So for those of you who don't know what that means, is that's essentially like if you have an applicant and say there's two sides to an issue, if one of the party comes to, you know, the deciding body and has a discussion without the other party there to either, you know, make their case or rebut, essentially that's an ex parte communication where the other party was excluded from that. So to the extent that that you are making like, and this body doesn't make quasi-judicial decisions, that's really the Board of Adjustment, but you guys are really more like, you know, as I mentioned before, kind of like almost like quasi-legislative with respect to what you do. And what I will tell you is that ex parte communications are completely fine at the legislative level. Okay. In fact, there's a name for ex parte communications at the legislative level, and yes, it's called lobbying. But it does, you know, it is a problem when you're actually making decisions about a, you know, a particular issue. So our recommendation, anything less than a legislative decision, is try to keep all communications in the public eye, if you will. Okay. You know, public hearings are absolutely required for the applications that come forward to this board. And to protect the sanctity of that public hearing, it's important that if an applicant ever were to approach you individually about that, you would say, hey, I can't talk about that. We have a public hearing coming up. You need to bring that issue up there. And, you know, it's, you know, why I said, you know, it's not necessarily a hard and fast rule. What I will tell you, it is a really, really, really good policy, and it might get you out of some uncomfortable situations to be able to say, hey, sorry, I can't talk to you about that because the public hearing's coming up. And so that, you know, gets your excuse. You know, you don't have to have someone call you on your cell phone to get you out and, you know, out of the bad blind date. So prejudgment bias, another issue to be concerned about is you want to, again, be careful about telescoping how you're going to vote on something before you've heard all the facts. So, you know, we had that little pyramid before, legislative, administrative, and quasi-judicial, you know, previously. So what I'll tell you is prejudgment bias, really, really bad for quasi-judicial or judicial decisions. Like, you're absolutely supposed to wait till you hear the case before you make up your mind. Don't even talk about it. At the administrative level, it's a little better standard, I guess, in that, you're charged with having to know about the subject matter. So you might have at least some preconceived notion, but you really should wait until you've heard all the facts to make up your mind. And then if you are happen to do things at the legislative level, then prejudgment bias is actually fine. You're allowed to, have that. Okay. Conflict of interest. One thing to keep in mind is, as a administrative body of the city, each of you are members that will have some responsibility under Chapter 105 of Missouri statutes, which deals with the prohibited acts. And primarily yours come in the form of whether you would have a financial interest in anything that you're making a decision about, or whether you're related to somebody that you're making a decision about. So when those things come up, if you ever think that you have a potential conflict of interest, please reach out to staff. Please reach out to the law department. Let us know what it is. What I will tell you is that most people fail in the court of public perception a long time before they fail in the court of law when it comes to conflict of interest. So things will look bad and people will be, knocking you on Facebook or saying bad things about you, but in the end, they really probably don't know what they're talking about, or that really doesn't rise to the level of a legal conflict of interest. But, all the same, be sure to check that out so we can look at it for you. Social media considerations. I want to cover this real quick. Your membership on a volunteer commission or board may absolutely affect your use of social media. So if you're using your personal social media platform to conduct official business, you may have put yourself in a situation where you cannot restrict others' comments, okay? You are part of the government because you're on this board. And if you're out there with, so-and-so planning commissioner or whatever, you're out there reporting on, things that the planning commission said on your social media, you may have created essentially an open forum. And then if someone gets out there and kind of bags on you for decisions that you made, or they don't like the way you went on something, you can't block those comments at that point if you have created an open government page. So you need to be very careful about what it is that you're putting on social media about your official role. Again, something you should kind of consult with staff, consult with the law department about before you do that. And, back to that prejudgment bias and things like that, depending on your role, you want to be careful about not putting stuff out there saying like, hey, I can't believe I'm going to be facing this clown tonight at my planning commission meeting. There's no way in hell I'm going to, grant this, approval or whatever. And you've got that out there ahead of time. Boy, that's going to be, the first, exhibit in whatever lawsuit comes against the city. So please be careful using social media. Sunshine law, keep in mind, sunshine law, in addition to the city council, the sunshine law specifically applies to committees, boards, commissions, advisory committees, and quasi-governmental bodies. So that is right from the sunshine law. You guys as a planning commission are absolutely subject to the sunshine law. And today I sent out the materials, and I was actually going to put something on there that says, please do not reply to all. And the reason for that is you can, we're having an electronic meeting right now. It's kind of more obvious, right, that we're having an electronic meeting. It's noticed up, and, members of the public could join us if they wanted to, and so forth. But truthfully, if you send an email out and then there's a reply to all, that communication is now being had by a quorum of the commission. We just had a meeting, and that meeting wasn't given 24 hours notice. There was no agenda posted there, all of that. And so we essentially could have violated the sunshine law when we do that. So if don't get me wrong, from the standpoint of getting information out efficiently, accurately, and so that everybody gets the same information at the same time, a one-way communication through email is the best possible way to do this anymore. Just do not reply to all. When you get one of those emails, make sure you reply only to the sender on that, so that you don't create an unnoticed electronic meeting. Keep in mind too, if you're out, texting, official business, depending on, how your phones are set up, you could be creating records that are then subject to disclosure through the Sunshine Law. And what matters is, does that message pass through any sort of city paid for either device or even a server? So let's say you have email on your phone. It's your personal phone. It's not a city issued phone, but you're using, John Smith at planningcommission.com or something like that, or that's your email address, and it passes through the city server. If you're out there saying stuff, that could be, again, contrary to your best interests, shows prejudgment bias or some of those other concerns out there, that stuff may be obtained through a Sunshine Law request. And so again, we can look at individual situations, but I'm always, just if nothing else, I want that red flag moment for you to, be cautious about the fact that your communications may be subject to the Sunshine Law because of your role as a planning commissioner. Okay. I think it's the last topic that we're going to cover for tonight, and that is parliamentary procedure and rules of order. As you guys know very well, because earlier tonight you actually had you made some amendments to your procedural rules. You are authorized by state statute to provide for essentially the rules of the commission, which can include rules for decorum, respect, and conduct, how to carry out the meetings to make those meetings more meaningful. Most people are familiar with Robert's Rules of Order as being, kind of the be-all, end-all of parliamentary procedure. However, what I will say is Robert's Rules, while very well known and it is extremely complicated. It is a very thick book with very thin pages, and it's designed to service. You see in the picture here, you got the top picture is a picture of our House of Representatives, at the federal level, and I believe the bottom one is a picture of Parliament. It's designed to keep all of those people in line. Okay, cities are not required by law. City commissions are not required by law to follow Robert's rules. There are many other rules of order that are much more simple and easy to administer. And so, I did this training a couple months ago for the city of Grain Valley. And after we discussed this, they actually threw out Robert's Rules of Order as their parliamentary procedure guide, and they adopted a different one called Rosenberg's Rules, which is much more simplified. So just by way of example. So that's what I have for you this evening. I am very happy to answer any questions you may have. So I will stand by for that.
I have a question, but I'm not even sure exactly how to state it, so I'll have to do my chapter book thing. But I had a previous commissioner that I thought gave me really good advice in that when an applicant or a citizen is talking and expressing concerns, to write their name down, first name, whatever triggered to remind me who it was, and then what their concerns were, kind of bullet point them, and make sure that as a commissioner, I asked whoever needed to answer that question for that citizen, so that it was on record that we did the best that we could to deal with that citizen's concerns or the applicant's questions, either one. And I forget sometimes, but how important is that? How do we sort through who to ask sometimes, I think is difficult, or at least I have trouble keeping on track.
Right. And so I may have missed it at the beginning, but I assume that you're talking about a situation where you're being caught by somebody, like maybe at the grocery store or whatever, and they're catching you outside of a public hearing, correct?
No, more like in the public hearing, in the realm, to make sure that it is on public record what was asked and what was answered. Just kind of for some of the reasons that you talked about, like to protect the city or to make sure that we've satisfied the public's questions or concerns.
That's an interesting question. So a couple things to think about. I believe, I think after we wrap this up, you guys are going to approve your minutes of the last meeting. Okay. But under the Sunshine Law, what I will tell you is minutes don't have to have really any detail at all. Essentially, it's, when who was there, who was absent, if there was a vote, how they voted, you know, when you opened the meeting, when you closed it, and just a general, you know, discussion of what you talked about. And that could mean, the commission heard, an application for rezoning of, property at 123 Main Street, period, and then move on. Commission also heard an application for, lot split at, such and such other address or something like that. So there's what I will tell you is there's no requirement, for that detail. The other thing to keep in mind is while the public, certainly the public has a right to speak at a public hearing. Okay. And so from a forum standpoint, we do have what's called a limited public forum. Okay. And so people are allowed to come speak on the issue of the application at hand when we open the public hearing for that particular application. But they can't come in and talk about whether they like fluoride in the water or whether they, liked, the shoes that the mayor was wearing or something like that. Like, we don't care. And it is not an open public hearing, open public forum for those purposes. Okay. And I guess what I will add to that is that while public comments are important, the voice of one person doesn't outweigh the voice of the collective citizens as a whole. Okay. So that having been said, certainly if an issue is raised and, that is something, that needs to be brought, what I would suggest is if an issue has been raised, and if that is something that the commission as a whole thinks is something that does need to be looked at, then you all should, like maybe, the point would be is, and let's say this is something completely within your power, right? Because we're kind of working in a vacuum here. But if it's, let's say it's something to do with what the comprehensive plan should be changed to do X, okay? Well, great suggestion. Thank you, Mrs. Smith, for coming forward and bringing that up. And then, maybe, what you could do, Madam Chairman, is essentially say, okay, so, Mrs. Smith just made this point. Would anybody on the commission, move to have this brought forward on the next agenda? Someone says, so moved, it's seconded. Then as a body, you decide to put that on because that's what you all think is in the best interest of the city as a whole. And thank you to Mrs. Smith for bringing that forward. Flip side of that is, she may have come up with something that was completely ridiculous. You all have been over it, and it's not something you're going to change. And, you've already made decisions on that. At that point, maybe nobody moves to make the decision. And then as a body, you've said, hey, we're not going to bring this up. Now, that doesn't mean that's the end of it for Mrs. Smith. Then at that point, what she could do is she could take it to an individual council member. That council member might say, oh, well, I think you've got a point here. Let me bring it up to the city council. I'll move this. And then the council can vote and say, hey, we're going to direct the planning commission to look at this. And then you guys are like, okay, that's our job. You've now asked us to look at this. It's going to be live. And then essentially staff puts that on the agenda. So I think, maybe, the ultimate wrap up of the answer to your question is it just, it does kind of depend, lawyer answer. But, if you all think it's important enough to put on the agenda, you have the ability to do that, but you have to do that as a body. And again, if you think that it's not important, you have that ability to do that too, but you also may receive direction from your council as well.
Okay. Thank you.
I didn't put everybody to sleep, did I?
No, I'm shocked that they're so quiet.
One question, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
This training session, will it be accessible later that we may review your excellent remarks at a later date? And if so, how do we intend to disseminate this information?
So and I think if any, I may stop sharing my screen. I don't know if you all can see each other. I can't see you anymore. So I'm going to probably, I'm going to see if I can figure out how to stop sharing my screen. Let's see.
We can provide a link once the
okay. Thanks, Rick.
of the actual recording.
Okay, so you guys did record this, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so
It'll
each of
be on
you.
It'll be on the city's YouTube channel as well.
Okay. Great. So, so first of all, I guess in answer to the question is, before tonight's meeting, I did send a copy of the full page slides and a copy of some like notes pages that you could use if you wanted to take notes this evening, because I don't like to just read completely from the slides if I can help it. So anyway, so you each should have received that, and I just sent that out on the email that, you know, had the meeting link on it and so forth. So you all should have at least that material. Then, you know, to the extent that I said something that wasn't exactly on the slide or whatever, you know, doing my color commentary, if you will, then it does sound, you know, from Rick, he indicated that this has been recorded and you will be able to review that.
Thank you. Commissioner Young?
Yes, I actually have 3 things, and I'll save the
There you go.
stupid question for the last one. But so an example of ex parte communication is only communication that happens outside of a public forum. Is that correct?
So I would say yes, because typically what we've done is we've noticed up a public hearing, you know, and you know, you would expect that both parties would be there. Now, if you availed both parties, you gave them notice, right? And then one of the an applicant doesn't show up, that's on them. Like, I would consider that ex parte communication, because you're at least having it in a public setting, noticed up through the public hearing process. So I think you're safe in that circumstance if the applicant didn't show. And maybe you all have had that circumstance before where, you know, somebody didn't show and they just expected, you to just, you know, take a look at it and make a decision on it. So, so hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and the example that I wrote down is something that I think you said, if like, if somebody comes up, if an applicant comes up to you at a restaurant and is like, hey, looking forward to you voting or approving my thing or whatever, then that is definitely, you know, not okay.
Yeah, it's so, and again, I will say for you guys, okay, it's a little more okay for you than it would be like the Board of Adjustments. Okay, the Board of Adjustments, that's a flat no. Okay, for you guys, what I'm telling you is it's a best practice to, you know, what I love to say is preserve the sanctity of the hearing. Say, hey, we're having a hearing on this. It's only fair that everybody hears this at once and in the same way, because if you're telling me something right now in this restaurant, you know, then, you know, the other commission members may not get to hear this piece of information, which may matter, or, you know, they may hear it in a different way by the time they present it. What I will say, though, is sometimes a saving grace, and this maybe goes back to Chairwoman McLean's, you know, kind of issue, is that, you know, and I know you were talking a little bit more about like in the hearing, you know, if something's brought up in a meeting, but if somebody does bring something up to you where it's more like ex parte, then the next best thing to do would maybe, you know, to you know, ask the chair if you can have the floor and essentially say, you know, hey, I just want to let everybody know that on October 26th, you know, Mr. Smith came up to me and, you know, had this discussion. And so I just want to, you know, put this out there that this is what I was told. And I want to make sure that the rest of the commission has, you know, the same information that I had gotten. And that's another way to handle it. You know, and maybe that's easier to deal with than just telling someone flat no. But, you know, I guess I'm giving you permission to tell them, no, we got to wait for the hearing. And, you know, hopefully that gets you out of it. So.
Yeah. Another thing, so in the background portion, you mentioned code enforcers. Is there anyone in this meeting that can answer like how many code enforcers Independence has?
Rick, is that you?
Let me see if I come up here. There I am. I got a very slow connection today. We have, it depends on what department you're looking at. I mean, we have several for business licensing. We have, I think, 4 for building construction inspection. We also have weeds and abatements. So we have, I have to get you a full count, but we have at least a good 2 of each one of those. And then we have fire inspection as well. So we have quite a few. And then we also have engineering inspection, right-of-way inspection as well. So there's 4 in that group as well. So.
Okay. And so at first, I guess I would have thought that it was, I mean, some of that is mandatory, fire inspection and things like that. I guess the ultimate question would be like how much code enforcement is due to discovery of like a business operating outside of what the city knows about, and sort of citizen involvement, sort of code enforcement. But that is like,
are you asking like how appropriate it is, or like how does it actually come about, or?
Yeah, I guess essentially, yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
well, I mean, to some extent I can answer that question, again, and really this comes from the context of being the city attorney of 60 cities, or, our firm at least is. And, I've got cities that don't even have as many people on city staff as Rick just named for your inspectors. Okay. So like if they have anybody, they've got one. And what I will tell you is a lot of it has to do with how busy are they? If they've got, 30 applications in at a time, I'm going to tell you that are probably not out doing, kind of organic, looking for problems, because problems are finding them on a regular basis. Okay. And it's all they can handle to do that. If things are slower, there may be situations where they're saying, hey, we don't have any applications to process right now. This might be a good time to just go out, take a look for various, applications. And maybe with the resources that the City of Independence has, maybe you do have some dedicated folks whose job it is just to go out and find problems as opposed to problems finding you through an application.
I can add to that too. We do have some statistics that I think Miranda can provide us with that actually show the code enforcements that are either brought in by the public or the code enforcement officer actually went out and observed. And we're trying to have a lot more proactive enforcement, but it all just depends, kind of like what Joe said, it depends on the load at the time. For example, during the summertime, you're going to have a lot of, for example, weed abatement, and many of that may be brought by the public. But at the same time, we're also for like junk, trash, and debris, trying to be more proactive at it before we get those cases in. But we actually do have a log of the differences between what the inspector actually produces in terms of a code violation versus what has been brought in by a citizen.
Got it. Thank you. And my third thing, I'm a little worried to even bring up, but with the thing that we voted on at the top, we've removed zoning out of the title, and the changes that we approved, I was thinking were just to kind of be efficient in some of the wordings and things like that. But then with your presentation, you're saying that zoning is different than planning, and so I'm wondering, like, is independent? Are we going to have? Does the Planning Commission now not deal with any zoning?
No.
Or if
I will say, so as soon as I got your packet for tonight, clicked on the packet, looked at it, I'm like, okay, well, what else do they have on there tonight? So I looked at the resolution, and the resolution said we're taking zoning out of the name. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, that's not how this works. So we did actually look at that, and Katie, Catherine Gerstner, who's on the call here, she actually looked at that for us, and she went out and we took a look at your charter. And in fact, your charter sets you guys up as the Planning Commission, but there is a section in that when you read down through the charter, there's two pieces that gives the Planning Commission the authority to do all the zoning stuff. So so what you guys did was absolutely, and if you remember, like when that came up earlier tonight, I actually said this. I said, we reviewed this and we're fine with everything. But I will say, it stopped me for just a second because we went and was like, whoa, can we do this? And so we looked at it, but it is absolutely, you guys made your name consistent with what the charter says. It's not covered in your UDO, and I didn't find it in any other ordinances that deal with the city, from that standpoint. And so totally fine. And it did not change your powers. It just changed your name.
Yeah, that's what Jordan and I were aiming to do, was trying to get everything on the same page with our name.
Understood. And that was it. Thank you for your presentation and your time.
Great. Yeah, hopefully it was helpful.
Those were great questions. And yeah, my heart stopped just a little bit also.
I really meant to, I did tell you guys ahead of time because I knew it was coming later.
Oh,
It was-
man.
It's called foreshadowing, right?
Yes. Yeah. Any other questions or comments before we approve the minutes for today? I also want to say thank you. I appreciate the training. It's been a long time since I had mine. And I was fortunate enough to have, it was a one-on-one training. Actually, there was three city people, one attorney, and I was grateful for that training. And then we also had Robert's Rules training, and we also had multiple use building training on many years ago. I think Bill was in on that one also. It was just really nice and a good refresher, because it is hard to remember some of these things when we're just doing meetings after meetings and a lot of short-term rentals that dull our minds sometimes.
Right.
They're great, but they're easy. At least now they're easy. But I do
might say, as we get further settled in as the city attorney, I know Jeremy and I have talked about, and I think, working with Brian and Adam, that, we may look at, we do have a lot of training on the shelf, if you will, so we don't have to create anything other than maybe, specifics to independence that, like I did training for the city of Blue Springs this summer, where we trained the planning commission, the board of zoning adjustment, everybody all at once. And we did, something, a lot more similar to what you were just describing, and got some of these interrelated boards together. So.
Yeah, it's really nice. I also wanted to take just a second and say how appreciative I am of this planning commission. I am just in awe of how thoughtful you all are and how lucky we are to have such a thoughtful panel, and one that truly cares, because we can see historically how independence has paid for. I don't want to throw any shade on past planning commissions. It would have been long time ago, but we are paying the price for commission and city decisions that were made, decades ago. And so we are doing some cleanup, like I like to say, in aisle 7 or whatever it is. But I've been just so appreciative of how thoughtful this commission is. And we've had, a couple tough ones come up before us, and how we handled them, I thought was just I was really proud of us. So I appreciate you all, and thank you for the talents and the skills you bring to this panel. I think that the city's very fortunate. So thank you very much. Okay, with that, I'll give everybody a minute to look over the minutes. They aren't very long. Short meeting.
And just to note, on future meetings, these will now be part of the consent agenda. So it'll just be one motion. If we have any comments, there are sometimes on this consent agenda, those will be approved in one motion.
Yep, and they'll be at the beginning of the meeting, correct?
Correct.
Does anybody have any changes or corrections to the minutes? If not, if you'll all unmute, and do you approve of these minutes? Say yes.
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 Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And the minutes are approved. Thank you, everybody. And thank you again, city staff. Thank you, Mr. Lauber, for a really great training, a lot of really good information. Appreciate everything.
Thank you for the opportunity. We appreciate it.
Any commissioners have anything for the greater good before we exit? Bill, you just went quiet. That's crazy.
You need not add to that which is good.
All right. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. Night.